This week on the Woven Energy podcast.
I define the term esotericism as the survival of shamanism within civilization. But it's the same thing, it's a drum, and it's used for the same thing. It creates vibrations and a rhythm that are very, very useful to the shaman.
How dare you dirty your drum?
Yeah, the drum is unusable, because we're talking about the physical, the superficial, rather than the meaning, the meaningful. Shinto is shamanism, and it has many branches, and some of them are more exoteric and some of them are more esoteric. Shamanism lived on in Japanese history a lot longer, even into the present, though some of the Shinshu-kyo are still very, very shamanistic. I'm going to let you guess what the very first thing to do is, Joe.
Get into a state of chillicity.
Very good. And that's the point when you breathe in again, that's the point when you resist the outward expansion of your ribcage. The feeling is like sinking down in the ground. So don't imagine it, for goodness sake, don't imagine it. Some people find sitting in seiza quite uncomfortable. And again, it's one of these things that you get used to. It can hurt your ankles. I know what the immediate question is going to be. If the branch moves up, do I breathe in? If the branch moves down, do I breathe out? No. You allow the branch to take control of your breathing. The truth is, the reality in nature is beautifully and bewilderingly complex. And as shamans, we don't want to resist that. We want to revel in it.
Welcome to the Woven Energy podcast on shamanism. Joe here once again with Damon Smith, continuing our project of bringing you shamanism from the ground up, your complete resource on shamanism. Now, this week, episode 21, we are once again looking at a practical technique for stage 2, the Amska, and it will be a technique from Japan. So, a few things. If you are not sure what we're talking about regarding the Amska, listen to episode 16 onwards, which is when Damon introduced us to stage 2 of learning shamanism and our first actual shamanic techniques. Also, before you listen to this episode, go and listen to the last one, which was an introduction to Japanese shamanism. It's not essential listening, but it was fascinating nonetheless, and will give you a good context for this episode if you want to deepen your understanding. So as always, if you're not on the email list, head over to wovenenergy.com and grab the exclusive episode we did just for you guys who sign up, which looks at shamanism with broad brushstrokes and goes into the first thing you need to do to pursue actual shamanic technique. So we're going to kick this episode off with, and I quote, the superficial differences between Japanese and Mongolian shamanism, as we said last episode. So why are we saying superficial differences here, Damon?
Because shamanism's the same thing. Wherever you go, in its core, shamanism is about a member of a small group who takes on a particularly integrated relationship with nature, or becomes part of nature to quite a large extent, in order to derive understanding from nature that can then be used to benefit the wider group. That's what shamanism is. The ways in which that's done are very, very similar the world over. So when we say superficial, we're talking about things like the words that are used, and in settled civilized societies, we're talking about things like the ways in which the shamanistic tradition has been embedded within that society in order to protect it from the harm that can be done to it by the miasma that's part of that society, or miasmas plural.
The suppression of shamanism.
Yeah, so the ways in which... So remember, I define the term esotericism as the survival of shamanism within civilization. Shamanism always has to protect itself within civilization because it becomes a target for the power structures, for the... if you like, we discussed the agricultural surplus controllers being the Wang in China, being the source of what you would call dominator society, dominator culture. And they like to dominate people, they still do today, although they take on more forms. They're not just people who have taken control of agricultural surplus now. They have control of other forms of wealth. And they... in general, have seen shamanistic technique is a challenge to their authority. Partly because their authority is preserved through exotericism, and obviously esotericism is something of a challenge to exotericism from the point of view of an exotericist. So also the ways that the visual cues, the costumes, the tools that the shamans use, although they're all the same kinds of things, they're drums and mirrors and bells and various things of that nature, they're decorated differently, they're made differently. So this is what I mean by superficial differences. Interestingly, in Japan, there's a museum called the Sankokan Museum, which is part of one of these, which is maintained by it's a museum of anthropology. It's maintained by one of the Shinshukyo that we talked about the last time. But the very interesting thing is that it has a lot of shamanistic artifacts from around the world in it. And I'm not sure how many people who are members of the Shinshukyo would really realize that those artifacts are effectively the very same artifacts that they're using in their daily pursuit of their spirituality. I'm not sure. Obviously, some of them will realize that, but it'd be very interesting to know, because obviously the artifacts that they use are the same things. They're drums and masks and various other things, various other costumes and various types of musical instruments, other ritual implements. They're the same things, just obviously the ones they use today are really nicely constructed by, skilled craftsmen and look a bit tidier than the ones that are in the museum. But actually, those artifacts that are in that museum come from hunter-gatherer peoples, and those artifacts, versions, more civilized looking versions of those self-same artifacts are used by the group that sponsor that museum. Quite interesting. So that's what I mean by superficial. Obviously, modern Japanese society has a very high standard of living. So if you see a Japanese drum, for instance, something like a taiko, it'd be beautifully constructed, and will visually look somewhat less, should we say, somewhat less rustic than your typical shaman's drum. Yeah. But it's the same thing. It's a drum, and it's used for the same thing. It creates vibrations and a rhythm. They're very, very useful to the shaman. Yeah. So this is what I mean by the differences. So there's something inbuilt inside us as human beings with rhythm, anyway, isn't there? Why do we? Dance music's just doof doof. Yeah. But another difference, another superficial difference is things becoming symbolic over time. So as esotericism inevitably starts to move towards exotericism, and this is not a binary shift. There's shades of grey along a way. So for instance, the idea of chalicity is heavily embedded symbolically in Japanese Shinto culture. So it's kind of, they call it ritual purification. Before you go on a shrine, there'll be a place like a spring thing that you can rinse your mouth out and this sort of thing. They have these purification rituals that they go through in Shinto. And what I mean by purification is they're getting rid of the ashiki, as they call it, the shiki or the hokori or the dust inside them, in a way, but they're doing it using symbolism rather than really achieving a state of chalicity, which is quite hard, as we all know. We've got this stage in the podcast. Probably everybody's been trying. It's not the easiest thing. It's much more easily achieved symbolically than really. And so, as you find in modern Japanese culture, certainly the Shinto-inspired Japanese culture, there's this great liking for cleanliness, for physical purification, if you like, that you wouldn't find in a hunter-gatherer culture so much. If the hunter-gatherer drum was a bit dirty, hunter-gatherer shaman's drum was a bit dirty, you probably not going to find that too much of a problem with using the drum. If you go to a very exoteric descendant of shamanism in Japan, one of these many groups that still have shamanistic origins in Japan, and there are hundreds of them, literally hundreds of them. Interestingly,
How dare you dirty your drum?
Yeah, that the drum is unusable because we're talking about the physical, the superficial, rather than the meaningful. Yeah. Not to say that the Japanese obsession with cleanliness has had only superficial aspects historically. I mean, in the feudal period in Japan, people survived wounds that they certainly wouldn't have survived in the West, very serious wounds, simply because the wounds didn't get infected because of their very high level of cleanliness. Quite interesting, but Shinto, what you could call the native religion of Japan, which incidentally didn't have a name before Buddhism arrived. Shinto, the word Shinto was created in order to distinguish it from Buddhism, is shamanism. And it has many, many branches, and some of them are more exoteric and some of them are more esoteric. And the exoteric ones are popular and the esoteric ones are unpopular, But if you get to the heart, even within the exoteric branches, you will find individuals practicing in a more esoteric way. And so effectively,
they're like the outcasts, aren't they? They're the ones that are frowned on by the others.
Yeah, if you think of the word Shinto, it means the To is the way, and Shin is Shen in Chinese. It's Tenger in Mongol. It's just the underlying spirit of nature. That's what it is. So it's the way of the underlying spirit of nature. So the word Shinto, in a way, if you really understand it in its original sense, you remember we talked about Yoshida Kanetomo and how he tried to get Shinto back to its origins, with limited success, it has to be said, but maybe not with limited success, because the Shinshukyo, which are probably the most shamanistic groups in Japan, there are more than 100, or you could say even hundreds of Shinshukyo. Some of them are very, very small, and they're all different from each other, but a lot of them are shamanistic. You could say that the reason that a lot of them survived and prospered at one point in time was directly attributable to the Yoshida. So maybe it did have some kind of a legacy there. But the bottom line is, controversial statement in its original form, as Yoshida Kanetomo described it, Genpon Sogen Yuitsu Shinto, it is shamanism. Yeah. So you could translate the word Shinto in literally, you could translate the word Shinto as shamanism. So there you are. There's the Japanese word for shamanism, Shinto. Some people may find that a controversial statement, but if you use the literal meaning of the word, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's it. Superficial stuff.
Right then. Well, we know the words for shamanism. There must be, we know that comes from Siberia, don't we? That's a Siberian term?
It's a Venki term.
It's a Venki terms. And for some reason, that's been touted by everybody who quote unquote, is trying to research shamanism. So there must be other words to describe a shaman and shamanism.
Well, of course. I mean, every culture has its own. So there's one, Shinto.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. So, technique then. Let's get straight on with our Japanese Amska technique. I'm looking forward to this one. I'm sure everyone else is.
Well, it's Japanese in a very superficial way. So superficial.
It's really just an excuse to talk about Japanese history, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, to a certain extent. Although I think Japan's a really good example of Japan is a good country, a bit like China, but Japan is a good country if you want to understand what shamanism really is through history. Because Japanese history, shamanism lived on in Japanese history a lot longer, even into the present. Though some of the Shinshukyo are still very, very shamanistic. People like Kanrodai Rishidokai, these sort of Shinshukyo, not a very big group, but they still do very, very shamanistic things.
And you can still find those practicing
and if
there
you're
today.
Willing to work hard enough, you can find these people. Yeah. So what makes this technique Japanese? Well, its name. Now I'm running out. Yeah. Yeah. Do you follow what I'm saying? Yeah. So So this technique has a couple of names. Lots of different people practice this thing or something very like it. And, something very like this is practiced in Mongolia. And so, but, I just wanted to show that, it's not just about Mongolia, this podcast.
Yeah.
And so one of the names is Fukushiki Kyoku. Apologies to anybody who's totally fluent in Japanese. My long and short vowels are indistinguishable from each other and shall remain so. Which is disgraceful, really, but,
how dare you, Damon.
But so it is, yeah. Another name is actually the spirit animal, on which this is, I wouldn't say it's a proper full-blown spirit animal, but this particular spirit animal gives a lot of sense of what this technique is about. It's a spirit animal called Miso Sazai. So you can use that name as well if you want.
Okay.
And there are, I was about to say there are two forms of this technique. That's me getting exoteric. There are a number of forms of this technique, very many, many forms, but sometimes it's called shiho, which means the 4 directions, sometimes called happo, 8 directions. So I'm going to let you guess what the very first thing to do is, Joe.
Get into a state of chillicity.
Very good.
And,
yeah.
Listen to episodes 7, 8, and 9.
Yeah. So first you achieve a state of chillicity. Now, this is Amska. This is to do with the breath, which Kyoku is this Fukushiki Kyoku is about the breath. In some ways, that's Kyoku's like Amska in a way, And what you do is you're just breathing normally. This is a state of heightened awareness of the internals of your body. So this isn't really a technique you want to be starting out with. This is one that you would do once you start to get you've had some echoes, you've got a sense of what's going on in there.
You've got a base of experience.
Yeah. And so the thing, one of the other problems with this technique is there are various bits of it that people think require thinking. You remember we said stop thinking that thinking is important. You have to be able to do these things in a state of chillicity without thinking, and this takes some practice. Because if you think about these things, you'll break the chillicity. You'll break the chillicity, and therefore the exercise won't have any effect on you. So,
yeah.
So the first thing is the compression of the upper body, the compression of the rib cage, and you can do this in 4 directions, or you can do this in 8 directions. So effectively, you compress. This is where the shiho, the happo, comes into it. Shiho means 4 directions, happo mean 8 directions. But let's go simple and go with shiho. So the first thing is that the front of your chest moves inwards towards your heart. So that's like your sternum, yeah? That moves inwards towards your heart.
The shoulders come out?
No. The front of your chest comes... So obviously this is on an out breath. The front of your sternum, your shoulders don't move. Mm-hmm. The front of your sternum comes in towards your heart. And then you go east, which would be your right-hand side, yeah? Then the right-hand side of your ribcage comes inwards towards your heart. The shiho, the front stays in, yeah? Then you move to the back. Then the spine comes inwards towards your heart. And then you move around to the west, to the left-hand side. And the ribcage on that side comes inwards towards your heart. And then they stay. So effectively, you're making the core of your upper body dense. And you may be thinking that, oh my goodness, how can I possibly breathe? Well, this is the core of what this technique is about. You can breathe in that state. So if you think, what effectively you've done is you've taken your upper body, and then very slowly you've like twisting up a rolled up newspaper. You've like made it dense, and you can see where the happo comes in. Therefore, if I said the center of your sternum is like north, then the northeast would be the front right side of your rib cage. Then the east would be the right side of your rib cage, and then the southeast would be and you go around in 8 like that. And it's like twisting up a rolled up newspaper. You make the upper body dense, and then you keep it dense. Again, this is where it gets difficult, this technique. This is all without thinking. So once the upper body's dense, it remains dense. So it's almost like you've made a rock. You know how if you have a newspaper and it's open and it's floppy, it's very, very soft and floppy and you can shake it around.
Yeah.
Once you've rolled it up tight into a cone, it becomes dense, and you hit something with it, it could even hurt, you know? It becomes more like wood. And then so your upper body comes like a solid, tight cone, or a bell, something
This is
of that
all
nature.
compression, isn't it? We're not twisting here.
There's no twisting, but it's done in a methodical way so to make sure that all of the sides come in. Yeah?
Yeah.
Do you follow me? This is what the 8 directions... Don't read too much into the 8 directions and 4 directions, just so you haven't missed anything. Yeah? Because when you try to do this, if I just say breathe out, then it doesn't happen. You don't fully breathe out. People naturally don't fully breathe out. So this is forcing you to fully breathe out, at least with respect to your chest. And then it stays. It stays like this throughout the entire exercise. It's not going to move. And then if you're thinking, how can I possibly breathe? Then you probably aren't either an experienced musician, with a wind instrument, or a singer, or a martial artist, or a practitioner of Qigong or something of that nature. You can breathe, but you have to use your diaphragm. That's the layer of muscle that sits below your lungs and above your abdomen. And so your diaphragm has to, in order for you to breathe in that state, your diaphragm has to expand downwards into your stomach, into your abdomen. So you maintain your natural breathing, but you're maintaining natural breathing, you're breathing only with that diaphragm. You're not breathing with anything other than the diaphragm. Does that make some kind of sense?
It does.
And so, sorry.
Yeah, I'm just trying to do it now. Bring in the...
It's not as easy as you think.
No, it's certainly not.
the time you'll find it particularly difficult is when you start the in-breath, resisting the expansion of the rib cage. So if you take a very slow in-breath, you can repeat that north, east, south, west compression as you're doing it. So you don't just do that north, east, south, west the first time, but you do it every time on the in-breath. Then you'll make sure that your compression stays. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So we're bringing in, it's almost like we're bringing in the rib cage to start with. This comes in, and then that stays in whilst we bring in the east side.
Yes.
And that comes in, and so it's almost like I'm compressed from the front and the east, and then the back spine comes in.
Yes.
And then the east side comes in. So nothing's giving way for the other. It's like
nothing's giving
one's
way.
coming in, the other's
That's
coming
right.
in, and then you end up just squished.
I mean, what effectively when you start off, it's like everything's always coming in, yeah, because you do think a bit while you get used to the technique.
Yeah.
This isn't the end of the technique. This is just preparation. Yeah. So effectively, what you need to do is just practice that until
we're breathing out. We're breathing in on this or out on this whole process.
Well, it's easy when you're breathing out because it's easy to push them in. Yeah. So you start with an out breath. As you do that, north, east, south, west. That's all in one long out breath. But then when you breathe in again, you use your diaphragm. Your diaphragm expands downwards into your abdomen, and that's what sucks the air into your lungs, yeah?
Right.
And that's the point when you breathe in again, that's the point when you resist the outward expansion of your ribcage. And because you're so used to the outward expansion of your ribcage, then that you'll find that difficult, unless you've been one of the people who are fortunate or unfortunate enough to have some broken ribs sometime. If you've ever had broken ribs, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, yeah? Because then you really, really don't want to move them. When you breathe in, it sort of especially if it's a clean break, it pulls the break apart, So people who've had broken ribs are probably going to be quite good at this, So that's the start. So what you need to do is practice this. This is not the technique. You need to practice this until you are very, very comfortable that you can do that without any thought at all. That you can do that breathing continuously for a period without breaking the state of chillicity. Now,
can I just ask then? So we're compressing in. We're compressing in. And then we are releasing it, and then in and out. That's the practice method, is it? Or do we?
Well, wait a minute. Releasing what? We're not releasing the rib cage. We're not releasing the rib cage ever during the technique.
I see. Okay, so once
we keep pressing in when we're first learning it.
Yeah.
On the in breath, because naturally you'll find difficulty in stopping your rib cage expanding. Yeah, but you have to stop it expanding.
Okay, and once I've gone north, east.
Ideally, once it's in, it stays in and it never goes out.
Okay, and you continuously breathe through the diaphragm in order for that to happen.
Exactly. Well, it's not in order for that to happen. You want it. It's the other way around. That happens to make sure that you are only breathing from the diaphragm.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the point. What you want in this exercise is your breath very low in your body, for reasons that will become immediately apparent in the next bit. So the next thing is you can practice that bit of it anywhere. Okay. And this goes back to our discussion of, do you have to find a place where there's no one around and all this kind of stuff. For this, just to practice the mechanics of it and staying in the state of chillicity, you can do that anywhere. But when you go into the next stage of it, or the next bit of it, if you like, you do need a natural environment. So what you want to do is find some nice bit of ground to sit on, comfortable bit of ground that's near to a tree with low-hanging branches. You need a branch close enough that you can reach out and touch it without too much difficulty. So it doesn't matter whether you're touching it with your left hand or your right hand. So, the whole Toshalteen thing, maybe you can use both. One time maybe use your foot, for a bit of a change, whatever. But you need to be able to touch a branch. It helps if there's a bit of a wind blowing, but not a hurricane or anything, just a bit of wind blowing, so that the branch, what you want is a branch that's moving around in the wind that you can reach from the ground. Yeah. So you might have to search around a bit to find a place where you can do this. So what you need to do is sit on the ground within easy reach of a branch. So if I'm doing it, maybe if I'm using my left hand to touch the branch, then I'll sit in the Japanese seiza position. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but if you do a quick search on Google Images, SEIZA, you'll see it's a very, very traditional sitting position.
Is it the one where you're sat on your back legs?
Sat on your heels, yeah.
Sat on your heels,
yeah. And you want quite a wide base, so I part my knees quite a bit. You want to feel very, very down in the ground. Everything in this exercise wants to feel down and low, very, very low. Like you've got a very low center of gravity. I don't know if you remember the children's toy, the Weebles. They used to say the Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. Basically, they were a lightweight plastic toy that had a heavy weight in the bottom. So if you knocked it over, it would spring back up again.
Yeah.
You want to feel like that when you're doing this technique.
Right.
So some people find sitting in seiza quite uncomfortable. And again, it's one of these things that you get used to. It can hurt your ankles. That's nothing to do with the technique. This is not aragyo. Yeah. So if you do find it uncomfortable sitting in seiza, either practice seiza for short periods until you feel comfortable sitting in it, or use a cross-leg position. For this particular technique, a cross-leg position is not that great, though. The seiza position is much better. But it does work cross-legged. And like anything, once you get good at it, you can do it, standing on your head if you want, But what I try to feel like is a pyramid, like what the Great Pyramid of Giza. I try to feel very, very heavy and very, very low down rooted. So here I'm breathing down through my diaphragm. I'm not breathing high up in my chest. And my legs are apart, sitting in seiza, but with my knees apart. And I feel like a triangle shape going from the outside of my legs up to my head, like a pyramid. And with everything feeling very low down, everything very relaxed. Like my muscles are hanging on my bones. And when I reach out to touch the branch, my muscles need to hang in my arm. So effectively, everything is completely relaxed. Now, you can see you're going to have to do an awful lot of practice till you can do all of this without thinking about it, because there's quite a bit involved here. But so what you feel like is almost like the feeling is like sinking down into the ground. So don't imagine it, for goodness sake, don't imagine it. Just the feeling is like you're becoming part of the ground, almost like the ground goes along flat and then there's a hill in the ground and then it goes along flat again, and that hill is you. So you feel like you're not separate from the environment. But again, it's not something, you don't imagine that. And it's sort of like that feeling is the result of doing it right. if that feeling's arising, then you're doing it right. It's not that you don't adopt that feeling in order to make it work. Yeah.
Yeah.
So once you can sit in that position for an extended period of time, and get your Fukushiki Kyoku, which is the actual breathing bit going, then you can do the bigger thing, which is miso sazai. Miso sazai is a very, very small animal. It's a kind of bird. It's very, very small, ridiculously small. It's like they make birds that big. It's that kind of small. Yeah. And when it sits on a branch on a tree, and the wind blows, it has no choice but to move with that tree. It's not a big, you might see a big bird, like a raven, sitting in a branch, and the wind blows, and the raven's like, I'm not having that. It sort of adjusts itself, and it can keep itself stable. The miso sazai has probably a 1,000th of the power of something like a raven, So basically, it has to move with the branch. But if you see that happening, it's quite extraordinary. The miso sazai is sitting on the branch. There's quite a strong wind blowing. And the miso sazai almost looks like, just like we were saying, you're part of the ground. It looks like the miso sazai is just part of that branch. It's not having as much, given that it's a tiny bird. I mean, you're like a bird probably as long as your index finger, something like that, Given that it's a tiny bird and there's this wind blowing, you would think it'd be having a lot more trouble than that, sitting on this branch that's just moving around in the wind.
I bet there's a video. Surely there'll be a video.
There may be. So basically, you want to be like that bird. You want to be rooted in the ground. Obviously, I guess you could do if you find a big enough branch when you get good enough at this. But here we're talking about people doing very dangerous things, and I wouldn't recommend that. But basically, the way you get the sense of it is that you just simply put a couple of your fingertips up on the branch. I usually use my, but not always. Remember Torshal Teen? I usually use my ring finger and my middle finger, and I just lightly touch the branch with those two. Now remember this branch is moving, yeah? And like the miso sazai, I do not resist the movement at all. And I keep my fingers on the branch. So wherever the wind takes it, my fingers follow that branch. Does this make
which is
some kind of
probably
sense?
why you need to be completely relaxed, isn't it?
Exactly. And you don't want the branch to separate from your fingers, and you don't want your fingers to be like actively darting after the branch. It's almost like you're part of that branch. That makes some kind of sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. In the same way that your rootedness, you're part of the ground. Yeah. Now, the next thing, which is the ultimate purpose of the technique, the thing that's hard, is that you then let the branch take control of your breathing. So you allow the branch to take control of the breathing, so that the timing of your breathing and the movement of your breathing is no longer controlled by you. The movement of your breathing is controlled by the branch. Now, I know what the immediate question is going to be. If the branch moves up, do I breathe in? If the branch moves down, do I breathe out? If the branch moves forwards, do I breathe in? If the branch moves backwards, do I breathe out? No. Okay. You allow the branch to take control of your breathing. Okay. If you are in a state of chillicity, you will, I don't mean know in your brain, but you'll know within the technique. You'll know.
You're channeling the setel.
Yes. You'll know what the breathing should be, but you won't figure it out in your head. That makes sense?
Yeah.
If you're in a deep state of chillicity, and you need to practice this, when you're in a deep state of chillicity, you'll know what the breathing will be, and you'll know when you're doing it right, because the branch will take control of your breathing. And so the movement of the branch is controlling the movement of your breathing. Now, if you get a relatively heavy branch, that will go more slowly, and you'll find it easier. Yeah. So there's a progression here from big branches to small branches, and from low continuous winds to high.
We could as well be talking about extreme sensitivity
winds,
here as well, couldn't we? Because a big branch might be moving
No, because you're not if there's a decent wind, because you're quite far from the trunk of the tree here. It's at the end of the branch. You're touching it, yeah.
Okay.
So you're getting some movement, and you can try different ways. There's no right and wrong rules with this, but you definitely, to start off with, you definitely want a branch to start off with where the movement is very obvious, yeah. Just to get the hang of it. Then, but what you start to see through this stuff, which is the whole point, and this is leading on to level 3 and level 4 of learning shamanism, or stage 3 and stage 4, is that stuff is not separate from you, and that there's no these clean hard edges on things. Like when the Japanese craftsman's making this beautiful drum, it has these nice clean sharp edges. That's representative of civilization. It's the shaman's drum that's representative of the shaman's tatty drum that's representative of nature. Nature's not like that, and that complexity. We simplify things for civilization. We make things simpler in order to make our lives simpler and more easy to manage, because we have other complexities in our lives, like, who we report to and who they report to and what my position in the society is and all this kind of stuff. How do I get up the pecking order? All that kind of stuff. We have those things to worry about, so we make everything else really simple. And we praise design. These designers who do this sort of minimalistic design that's very simple and elegant, we praise that, And sometimes you do get that in nature, but the truth is, the reality in nature is beautifully and bewilderingly complex. And as shamans, we don't want to resist that. We want to revel in it. So the fact that there's a gazillion different types of branches out there, and there's a gazillion different types of wind, and the ground you're sitting on, who says it has to be level? There's infinite different situations in which you can do miso sazai, or do the technique associated with miso sazai. There's so many different. That's what we revel in. That's what we want. That's what we want to understand. But we don't understand that in our mind. We want to understand that in our being. We want to become part of that. And so this Fukushiki Kyoku, Shiho Happo, is the kind of base, and then the miso sazai is the kind of spirit animal part. Not a whole spirit animal. We're going to go on to spirit animals at some point in time.
I was going to say, this feels like a nice lead into it. This is like
exactly
a cross between stage 2 and stage 3 in a way.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a great bridging technique for that, and that's why I wanted to bring it in. So we've got Tillin, which is a bridge between Chelicity and the breath. Amskar, and now we've got this one, which is a bridge between exactly,
stage 2 and
bridging
stage
the other
3.
way. Exactly, that's the idea. So, and you'll find this at all the levels. There are bridging techniques at all levels, and this is a good one. This technique, it probably sounds relatively simple. It probably sounds relatively simple when we're here describing it, but just wait till you go and actually try it. The another great thing about this is you probably have in your mind, if you haven't tried it before, you probably have in your mind how it's going to go. How it's going to work. The great thing about that is, one of the things with shamanism, it's about unlearning as much as it's about learning. They say you can't put tea in a full cup. You have to empty your cup. This is part of what Chelicity is before it can be filled by nature. It's good that you think you know how this is going to go, because it's going to be such a great learning experience when you find out that you're wrong.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I must admit, that one, out of all the techniques we've talked about, that one feels like the hardest one so far.
Yeah,
to
definitely,
me.
Definitely. But no hurry, remember? No hurry.
Just that first bit of squishing myself up, that's...
Yeah, well, that don't make it sound so active, This is happening passively without thought, Like all technique, we need the guchach. We've got to build the guchach on all these techniques, because it's the guchach which makes it internalizes the technique within you, so you can do it without thinking. You absolutely have to do it without thinking if you want a state of Chelicity, and you need a state of Chelicity, or you're not going to get any value out of the technique.
Okay, fantastic. Is there anything else you want to go over with that technique or warn people about before we wrap up?
Well, the general idea of the miso sazai is that we can look at aspects of other things in the world. I don't mean, what I mean by look at. We're using the Amska to look at ourselves, okay? But we're looking at ourselves in a very raw way. We're not looking at ourselves like we normally do. We normally sort of place values and judgments and opinions. But if you remember Homiluk, the Homiluk technique, we're putting vibrations into our body in order to get an echo from what's really there. not from what we think's there, not from what we've read in books is there, but we're looking for those genuine vibrations coming from within us.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at ourselves like that, this is like the starting point. This is how Amskar's the door in. It's a good place to start, but actually, we could look at anything in nature like that, anything at all. And some things in nature are very instructive when we look at them like that. But animals in particular, animals have a kinship with us. So if you think about this, I mean, for instance, I could go and do the same thing. I could stick my hand in a waterfall, yeah? And I could use the variation in the water to control my breathing. It would be the same thing, yeah?
Yeah.
The same thing. So this is how we learn from nature. This is what we do as a shaman. So I could do...
You're plugging into nature then, are you?
You're plugging into nature, yeah.
Or nature's variations. But
the advantage of using animals, and this is more like a plug for stage 3 of learning shamanism, and stage 4. The advantage of using animals is they have a close kinship with us. They aren't far away from us. Even a tiny little bird like the Misosazai, it's not far away from us in terms of its spirit. Its spirit has a kinship with our spirit. Yeah, the spirit of a waterfall has a kind of distant kinship with our spirit, but the spirit of, in comparison to the spirit of a waterfall, the spirit of, say, Misosazai, a little bird like that, it has a very, very close kinship. You know, it's closer to us, way closer to us than it is to the waterfall. Does that make some kind of sense?
It does.
In terms of our nature, and so this is and all with one tiny little aspect of Misosazai's life, impressive but tiny, is that it is, and in a bigger sense, when you understand the character of the Misosazai, it has an ability beyond its tiny size. It's a strong little thing. It appears strong, but it's tiny. It can't possibly be as strong as it appears to be in other aspects of its life as well. And that is, one shamaness said, the teaching was that she appeared very, very strong, and people used to try to compete with her in feats of strength, and they would always lose. Mm-hmm. And she's and basically what was happening was she was using nature, and they were trying to fight against nature rather than fight against her. And there are many stories like that, and one where they're trying to pull her down off a platform, and other ones where somebody was wrestling with her when she was in later life, you know, and various things, you know, and but the root of that is and what she said is, if you let go of your strength, then Kami will let go of Kami's strength, Kami being the underlying spirit of nature, you know. And when you can be as in deep a state of Chalicity as Misosazai can be, you can pull off some amazing stuff, despite having no physical strength to speak of at all. Yeah. And so there's a kind of bridge or link, if you like, into what spirit animals are about.
Fantastic, Damon. I think that's been some of the most difficult techniques that you've gone into so far on these podcasts, at least from my perspective.
Cool.
I've been trying to do that compression thing, and even now I'm finding it hard. But that goes for all you guys as well. You can email me at joe@wovenenergy.com. That's joe@wovenenergy.com to let me know how you're getting on with this technique, any of the other techniques. I really want to hear from you so we can tailor these podcasts and make sure you're getting the most out of them. Also, head to wovenenergy.com as always, and you can sign up to the mailing list and get yourself an exclusive episode. So yeah, till next time, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you soon.